When the United States entered World War II, planners in Washington understood that the issue of manpower was not merely a matter of production mathematics but a test of democracy itself. In 1942, the War Department issued War Department Circular No. 59, in which the phrase, "to maintain Negro morale," appeared as a minor administrative note, yet it marked the beginning of a paradoxical chapter in history. The primary goal was not tactical, but political. Congress, particularly several Northern legislators, together with civil rights organizations such as the NAACP, pressured the Pentagon to prove that the promise of freedom and democracy also applied to Black Americans. It was in that atmosphere that, on the 15th of March 1942, at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana, the 761st Tank Battalion was born, officially named the Negro Armored Battalion. Inside the offices of the War Department, internal memoranda admitted that this was not an effort of equality, but a measure to stabilize morale in a society fractured by racial segregation. Senior officers feared that without black combat units, the industrial cities of the North would face a labor crisis. It is a political necessity, one passage in Circular 59 stated clearly, to demonstrate inclusion while preserving structure. According to a congressional report from May 1942, only 10% of black servicemen were permitted to serve in combat units, while the rest were assigned to logistics or labor duties. The creation of the 761st, therefore, was a concession wrapped in patriotic rhetoric. Lieutenant Colonel Paul L. Bates, a World War I veteran, was appointed to command the unit. In a letter to an old friend at Fort Benning, he wrote, "I know taking this assignment is the end of my career, but I want to see what they can do if properly trained." Bates found no existing training plan designed specifically for black soldiers. He had to redesign the entire curriculum, extending it to 2 years, while white units required only 12 to 16 weeks before deployment. Rather than treating that as a disadvantage, Bates turned it into a tool for meticulous training: 2 weeks of tactics, 36 weeks of mechanics, and 4 months of live fire exercises. According to records from the U.S. Army Ground Forces Report 1943, the 761st completed more than 3,200 hours of technical drills, 3 times the Army-wide standard. Bates remarked, "We made the best-trained battalion in the Army by accident." The long months in the Louisiana camp not only honed skills but also exposed the fractures of a divided society. Around Camp Claiborne, colored-only signs still stood outside every diner. Soldiers of the 761st had to build their own chapel, eat, and live separately from white units. A letter from Corporal Floyd Dade Jr. to his family read, "We learned to take apart our guns in the dark, but outside the gate, the light of the world is not for us." That atmosphere, paradoxically, forged a tight bond within the battalion. They understood that every mistake by one man could be used to condemn an entire race, so every movement had to be executed with absolute precision. The command structure of the unit was a small social experiment within a segregated army: 6 white officers, 30 black officers, and more than 600 non-commissioned officers and enlisted men formed a model of mixed officer command. According to the 1943 Armored Force Evaluation Board, this was an unprecedented structure. Bates insisted on maintaining independent command for black platoons, earning him the label of a color-blind idealist from some colleagues. In practice, the model proved effective. The 760 first recorded a disciplinary violation rate of only 0.4%, the lowest in the entire armored force. A white lieutenant once wrote in his diary, "They don't need shouted orders. They understand that orders are a test of dignity." When training concluded, technical evaluations showed that the 761st met all standards. The final report of the Armoured School at Fort Knox noted that they surpassed expectations in gunnery, navigation, and vehicle maintenance. In June 1944, orders for deployment to Europe were signed. On June 9th, the unit boarded the Esperance Bay in New York, crossing the Atlantic with convoys bound for England. The voyage lasted nearly a month amid stormy seas. Most soldiers were seeing the ocean for the first time. In his journal, Sergeant Leonard Smith wrote, "We went on deck on the third night, looked at the stars, not knowing who we were fighting for, but knowing we would not turn back." On the 8th of September 1944, the 761st arrived in Southampton, England. There, they received new M4A3 Sherman tanks and prepared for field deployment. 2 weeks later, orders came to land through Omaha Beach on the 10th of October 1944. The unit was placed directly under the command of the Third Army, led by General George S. Patton. Reading the unit's dossier, Patton scribbled in the margin, "I don't care what colour they are, as long as they fight." Yet in a letter to his wife earlier, he had written, "I doubt they can think fast enough for armoured warfare." Those words perfectly reflected the spirit of the era: skepticism, experimentation, and expectation. During the first parade in France, Patton stood before a line of Sherman tanks painted with Black Panther insignia and declared, "Men, you are the first Negro tankers to ever fight in the American Army. Everyone has their eyes on you." Those words were both an order and a warning. From that moment, the 760 first ceased to be an ordinary unit. They became the living proof of a political experiment that had turned into historical destiny, and on the wet fields of Lorraine, their first test awaited. In November 1944, eastern France was soaked in fog and mud. The Lorraine region, lying between the Moselle and Seine rivers, was a natural maze of marshes, flooded fields, and waterlogged dirt roads. According to the Third Army's operational map, this area formed a strategic barrier between the retreating German forces and General George S. Patton's troops advancing towards Saarbrücken. In the radio exchanges dated November 5, the Third Army headquarters noted, "Terrain severely limits armoured movement, but momentum must be maintained." The accompanying weather map marked the area of Morville-lès-Vic in red, with the annotation, "Soft ground, heavy clay." For tank crews, that was a warning. The 30-ton Sherman tanks would sink deep unless speed and spacing were maintained carefully. On November 7, the rain continued steadily. The 761st Tank Battalion received orders to coordinate with the 26th Infantry Division for an eastward attack. According to Third Army Field Order No. 11, the objective was to seize Morville-lès-Vic, a small town but positioned at the junction of two vital supply routes. Facing them were elements of Germany's 11th Panzer Division, equipped with 75mm Pak 40 anti-tank guns and several Tiger I tanks. The Germans believed the muddy terrain would immobilize the Shermans, and their intelligence reports still asserted that Negro troops unfit for complex armoured action. That error would bring their entire racial doctrine crashing down. On paper, the technical advantage was clearly in Germany's favour. The 88mm gun of the Tiger could penetrate 120mm of armour at a range of 1,000 metres, while the Sherman's M3 75mm gun could only pierce 81mm at 500 metres, according to the Ordnance Department test report 1943. However, such a theory did not account for the human factor. The Tiger weighed over 56 tons, its Maybach engine straining on flooded terrain, while the lighter Sherman was faster and, crucially, the 761st had spent 2 years training in terrain, exploitation, and angle firing. They did not aim at the heavily armoured front but focused on the sides or rear, where the plating was only 62mm thick. In that battle, each Sherman crew had an average of 3.5 minutes to identify and fire before coming under return fire. The after-action report of the 26th Infantry Division recorded, "The Panthers and Tigers' armour advantage neutralised by superior positioning and mobility." The combat organisation of the 761st reflected the discipline that Lieutenant Colonel Paul L. Bates had meticulously instilled. They were divided into 3 companies, A, B, and C, each comprising 17 tanks, moving in a wedge formation to maximise frontal firepower. On the SCR 508 frequency, company commanders maintained direct contact with the infantry to confirm firing coordinates. Company B advances to grid 412. The radio crackled in Sergeant Ruben Rivers' headset. He immediately ordered his driver to hold 18 kilometers per hour, slower than average, to avoid bogging down. One report from the 3rd Army radio log, the 11th of July 1944, noted 760, 1st maintains perfect comm discipline under artillery barrage. Meanwhile, the infantry of the 26th Division recalled, "We moved behind their tanks and felt safer than we ever did." At 9:17, the lead tank of Lieutenant John D. King was hit by a Panzerfaust and burst into flames in the middle of the road. 2 crew members were pulled out under heavy fire. Behind them, the remaining tanks did not retreat. Instead, they pivoted their turrets in unison, unleashing continuous fire towards suspected German gun positions. According to the German after-action report, the Panzerjäger 611 unit noted with astonishment, "Enemy Negro tankers show exceptional coordination under fire." It was the first time such a phrase appeared in Wehrmacht records. An enemy that had been taught black soldiers lacked discipline was now witnessing the opposite, demonstrated through flawless precision. During the battle, the rising Say River cut off the western supply route. The maintenance crew under technician William Harvey had to drive a recovery vehicle into the combat zone to replace the track of a Sherman that had slipped off the road. "We did it in 11 minutes, he later recounted in a post-war interview with the National World War II Museum. "We could hear the 88 seconds, but the tank had to move. That speed of execution saved the formation from being trapped. At a range of 600 meters, a Tiger fired, its shell grazing Rivers' turret. He ordered a sharp turn, flanking to the right. A Sherman armor-piercing round struck the Tiger's side, penetrated the engine compartment, and erupted in smoke. 'Target down,' came the dry voice over the radio. By 11 a.m., the town of Morville-lès-Vic was secured. 4 German tanks were destroyed, and 3 75mm guns were captured. The 761st lost 3 Shermans burned, 2 heavily damaged, yet achieved all operational objectives on schedule. According to the 3rd Army Operational Summary, 8 November 1944, the 761st displayed superior mechanical handling and combat endurance. The report also noted that the SCR-508 radio system performed more reliably than expected, maintaining uninterrupted communication throughout the entire 4-hour engagement, a record for a U.S. armored unit under rainy conditions. After the battle, Technical Officer Henry Baker compiled the damage data. 12 burned mufflers, 8 broken track wheels, and 2 jammed loading systems due to mud. All were repaired within 36 hours, restoring full operational readiness. In the maintenance log dated November 9, a brief note read, "No vehicle left behind." Those small details reflected the operational proficiency of a unit the system had once considered an experiment. As the afternoon settled, the Lorraine sky hung under a thin veil of smoke. Along the mud-clogged roads, the 761st Shermans stood in rows, their hulls caked with dirt. A soldier opened the turret hatch and lit a cigarette, the smoke mingling with the mist. In the distance, the sound of German artillery faded. Over the radio, Bates's voice came through, "Good work, Panthers." And on the opposite side of the front, in urgent reports sent to German headquarters, Panzer officers began to write words they never thought they would. "The Negro Tank Battalion fights with skill and precision equal to our own." And in that silence, theory died. After Morville-lès-Vic, the rain had not stopped. The mud of Lorraine was thicker than steel. On the night of the 15th of November 1944, the 761st Tank Battalion received orders to attack the Gibling-Falquemont railway line, an industrial zone bordering the forest where the Wehrmacht had established a new line of defense with mines and concrete bunkers. Aerial reconnaissance maps showed over 120 Telemine 35 anti-tank positions interspersed with 88mm gun emplacements. The terrain sloped gently. Low, leafless hills flanked the railway, offering limited visibility. According to the 3rd Army Intelligence Summary, the 14th of November 1944, the Gibling area was heavily mined and covered by direct fire weapons. Tanks must proceed in triad formation. It was a mandatory order. 3 tanks per group: lead, support, recovery, maintaining a distance of 25 meters, moving as a single body. At 6:40 a.m. on November 16, Company A, commanded by Captain David Williams, began to move. The sky was grey and thick, with visibility less than 400 meters. Staff Sergeant Ruben Rivers led the formation in a Sherman M4A3 marked A5. His tank was the lead vehicle, responsible for clearing the path, detecting mines, and inspecting the ground before the rest advanced. According to the after-action report, 761st Tank Battalion, Rivers' group led across an iron bridge where the tracks were broken and water covered the road. When the tank rolled over the 3rd threshold, a deafening explosion tore through the morning. The right front wheel was blown off, the tracks snapped, and smoke and mud erupted. The blast from the Teller mine hurled off the side armour, and a shard of steel cut deep into Rivers' right leg, exposing bone beneath the mud. Under standard procedure in the 3rd Army Armoured Operations Manual, when a tank hit a mine, the crew was to withdraw, wait for a recovery vehicle, and remain under cover. But in the field, everything was different. Rivers opened the turret hatch, pulled the tow cable from the rear, jumped down, and waded through the mud toward the obstruction blocking the path. German snipers continued firing from the cement factory. He hooked the cable to the steel beam lying across the road and signaled the support tank behind him to accelerate. The massive iron barrier trembled, then slid aside under the sound of gunfire. A soldier later recalled, "We saw him disappear in smoke, then that barrier moved like it was alive." When the obstacle was cleared, Rivers climbed back into the turret, wiped the blood from his leg, and continued ordering the formation forward. The only command recorded in the radio log at that moment: advance and hold. Within the 761st, that maneuver became known as recover and re-engage, a variation of official procedure that Rivers himself had devised during training to deal with ambushes in confined terrain. Instead of abandoning the vehicle, he chose to restore mobility on the spot, a bold yet effective decision. According to statistics from the 3rd Army Ordnance Section, thanks to this method, the 761st maintained 91% operational vehicles in November, higher than the Army average of 78%. Bates later wrote in his memoir, "He didn't follow the book, he rewrote it under fire." On November 17, heavy rain flooded the Gibling area. The enemy retreated but left behind numerous 88mm guns firing directly onto the railway. Company A employed a new technique later known among tankers as cat hunting. One tank was used as bait, moving slowly within enemy gun range to force them to reveal their position. 2 other tanks flanked from the sides, cross-firing at the guns as soon as they opened fire. Rivers had proposed trying this the previous night, based on his experience at Morville-lès-Vic, according to Combat Report No. 31, the 18th of November 1944, the bait and flank tactic helped locate and destroy 4 88mm guns in just 20 minutes. The report concluded, "New tactic initiated by Company A proves decisive, recommended for broader armoured use." In the afternoon of November 18, as the unit paused to refuel, the regimental doctor advised Rivers to leave the field. His wound was swollen and infected. Williams wrote in his report, "He refused evacuation, saying, 2 more days won't make any difference." On November 19, Company A received orders to capture the Gibling railway station, 3 kilometers from their previous position. Rivers, commanding a replacement tank, A3, led the advance across the broken bridge. German artillery fired with precision, forcing the tanks to edge toward the forest line. Over the radio, Williams called, "Withdraw and regroup." Rivers' voice replied, "I see them. We'll fight them." He held his position to cover his comrades' retreat. At around 5:20 am, an explosion echoed. An 88mm shell struck the turret of A3, wounding the entire crew. Rivers was killed instantly. According to the after-action report, the 20th of November 1944, Captain Williams wrote, "Staff Sergeant Rivers was killed while directing fire against anti-tank positions at close range. His action allowed the company to withdraw without additional losses." The final line was dry, but it was the truth of the battlefield. His death did not halt the formation, it only made it move faster. Immediately after, Sergeant Leonard Smith took command of the lead vehicle, maintaining the pace of the assault. It was the embodiment of the command resilience that Bates had emphasized during training. When the man in front falls, the command must not break. Within 6 minutes, Smith coordinated fire from the remaining 3 tanks to silence the enemy guns and then pulled the wreck of A3 off the line. When the battle ended, Williams sat quietly by the radio and sent the final message to headquarters. Mission completed. A3 destroyed. Rivers gone. According to the 3rd Army Morning Report, Gibling was completely under American control by 1900 hours that evening. On November 20, Bates signed a recommendation to award the Silver Star to Rivers. The file read simply, "For gallantry and tactical innovation beyond standard procedure." Nearly half a century later, on the 12th of January 1997, the highest U.S. military honor was finally awarded to him, the Medal of Honor, presented by President Bill Clinton to his family. During the ceremony, the light in the White House hall reflected off the shining metal, prompting a veteran of the 761st to whisper, "He was our manual. We just kept following it." In war, tactics sometimes arise from the instinct to survive. Gibling was where Rivers rewrote the textbook of American armored warfare with blood and discipline. The next morning, as fog covered the railway, the tanks of the 761st rolled eastward once again. Beneath the mud, the shattered steel from A3 still burned like the last heartbeat of a commander who had turned theory into action. In early December 1944, the skies over Belgium were shrouded in grey clouds, and the ground was hard as steel. East of the Ardennes, German armoured divisions moved silently through the fog, preparing for an operation they called Wacht am Rhine. According to the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht report, 14 December 1944, the Germans mobilized over 1,500 tanks, including Tiger I, Tiger II, and Panther, along with thousands of towed guns. The objective was to break through the Allied front and capture Antwerp within 10 days. Their 3 spearheads drove straight into the Ardennes forest, where General George S. Patton's Third Army was deployed along the Moselle River. When the German assault began on 16 December, no one could have predicted that this battle would become the greatest challenge in the history of the 761st Tank Battalion. At 3 a.m., the Third Army's radios crackled non-stop. General Patton was in Nancy when he received the first report of the German breakthrough near Bastogne. "They hit us hard," he wrote in his diary, "but we will hit harder." Under direct orders issued on 18 December, the 760 first was redeployed from the Saarbrücken sector northward to join the counter-offensive. They departed their camp through the snow, driving overnight for more than 160 kilometers at an average speed of 10 kilometers per hour along frozen roads. By the time they reached the Tilley area on the outskirts of Bastogne, the temperature had dropped to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, fuel had thickened into sludge, and the Ford GAA engine exhausts were coated with ice crystals. The Ardennes battlefield was a labyrinth of white snow, pine forests, and crisscrossing fire. According to the Third Army situation map, 22 December 1944, the area assigned to the 761st lay between the villages of Remy-Champagne and Tilley, where the Panzer-Lehr Division and remnants of the SS Führer Brigade held the line. In 3 days, the German division had lost more than 60 tanks, yet still controlled the ridgelines, from which their 88mm guns dominated the entire sector. On 23 December, Company C of the 761st implemented the cat hunting tactic first introduced by Rivers at Gibling, now scaled to regimental level. The method was simple but effective. One decoy tank moved into the open, drawing the enemy's fire. The instant the German gun flashed, 2 flanking tanks would sweep in, concentrating their 75mm fire on the enemy's side or rear armour. The C Company log, 24 December 1944, recorded, C Co. destroyed 3 Panthers in 12 minutes, all from flanking fire. This marked the first time the tactic was simultaneously applied across all 3 companies, transforming the 761st into a uniquely mobile and proactive unit amid the frozen terrain. But technique lay not only in tactics, it was also in the ability to keep machines alive. At 20 degrees Fahrenheit, lubricating oil froze, Sherman engines struggled to start, and electrical systems stalled. Engineer William Harvey wrote in his maintenance log, "At night we drained every engine, heated oil in cans, and poured it back by hand before dawn." According to the 3rd Army Ordnance Bulletin, 26 December 1944, the 761st maintained an 84% operational readiness rate, the highest among all of Patton's forces in the Bastogne area. While other units lost dozens of tanks to mechanical failures, the 761st reported only 5 tanks out of action due to frozen fuel lines. One mechanic later recalled, "We learned to fight cold as we fought the enemy." On the afternoon of 24 December, snow fell so heavily that visibility dropped to 100 meters. German artillery pounded relentlessly, trying to sever supply routes. The 761st, alongside the 87th Infantry Division, advanced toward Bastogne, where the 101st Airborne was encircled. In his report to headquarters, Colonel Bates wrote, "The Panthers hit us from the ridge at 400 yards. Our lead tanks held their ground. A shell struck the front armor of Sergeant Frank Cochrane's tank, yet it kept moving. Over the radio, he said, 'They've hit me 3 times, but I'm still giving them hell.'" The quote was reproduced verbatim in the 3rd Army Combat Journal, becoming a symbol of endurance in that brutal winter. As the fighting dragged on, logistics became the key to survival. Supply convoys had to move at night to avoid shell fire. According to the 3rd Army Supply Report, 27 December 1944, the 761st consumed approximately 3,000 gallons of fuel, 20,000 rounds of 75mm ammunition, and 40 tons of machine gun rounds each day. Maintaining that supply flow amid snow and ambushes was the result of the maintenance network that Bates had built since the early days in Louisiana. On 31 December, German forces began to retreat. The Oberkommando West report admitted, "Our armored spearheads stalled by fuel shortage and continuous American flanking attacks." On the American side, the 3rd Army compiled its results. The 761st destroyed or disabled more than 30 German tanks, captured 280 prisoners, and opened the southern corridor to Bastogne. In a memorandum dated 2 January 1945, Patton wrote, "The Negro Tank Battalion fought with extraordinary skill under impossible conditions. That success not only saved Bastogne but also evolved into a doctrine. The 3rd Army Operations Summary, February 1945, stated, 'Tactic cat hunting, adopted for all armoured engagements in forested and low-visibility terrain.' This meant that the combat method conceived by Rivers at Gibling had officially become a training standard. Patton, who had once doubted them, ordered the 761st to hold positions in the Ardennes forest for 21 consecutive days, with no leave and no rotation. When the snow melted in early January 1945, the fields around Bastogne revealed long black burn marks like drawn lines. The Shermans of the 761st stood among the wrecks of Panther tanks, their twisted steel glinting faintly in the weak sunlight. A soldier murmured as he stepped down from his tank, "We came to freeze and to fight. We did both." Along Tillet Road, the engines still rumbled steadily. They continued toward the Our River, beginning the next phase of the Rhineland campaign. On the final 3rd Army map dated 9 January 1945, Bastogne was circled in blue ink, annotated with the word "secure." Beside it was Patton's handwritten note, "Black Panthers held the line." The Battle of the Ardennes was not only a tactical victory, but proof that a strategy born from survival instinct at Gibling had reshaped the US Army's armoured warfare theory, and when the last guns fell silent and snow blanketed the tank tracks, the 761st left Bastogne quietly, carrying with them the legacy of men who had turned the idea of an experiment into legend. In February 1945, the convoys of the 761st Tank Battalion rolled across the German border amid the groaning sound of metal. On the operational maps of the Third Army, they were attached to the 103rd Infantry Division, tasked with providing armoured support for the Rhineland campaign. The objective was to break through the Siegfried Line, a defensive system nearly 630 kilometres long, known as the Wehrmacht's last wall of steel. According to Third Army Operation Order No. 24, armoured units were required to maintain mobility 24 hours a day despite destroyed roads, collapsed bridges, and limited supplies. This was the phase where warfare was no longer decided by firepower, but by logistics. The terrain of Western Germany was covered with dirty snow, alternating between muddy fields and the wreckage of towns. The temporary bridges, erected by American engineers, repeatedly collapsed under the 30-ton weight of Sherman tanks. In the engineering report of the 103rd Infantry Division, transport routes were described as hazardous but passable. To maintain momentum, the logistics teams of the 761st established a mobile repair point directly behind the front line, called Field Maintenance Station No. 2, located in the Ensdorf area. There, technician William Harvey and his mechanics worked 72 continuous hours to restore 14 Sherman tanks damaged by collisions and gearboxes clogged with frozen mud. Harvey later recounted in an interview with the National World War II Museum, "We worked by lanterns and engine heat. When the oil froze, we melted it on stoves and poured it back. The numbers reveal the harshness of their task." According to the Third Army Ordnance Bulletin, February 1945, during the entire Rhineland campaign, the 761st maintained an operational readiness rate of 82%, the highest among all of Patton's armoured forces. This meant that out of every 100 tanks, 82 were always ready for combat. On average, other units achieved only 68%. The report noted, "Maintenance discipline is exceptional. Crew-level repair efficiency exceeds standard procedures." That success came not only from skill, but from organisation. Each company in the 761st had a mobile repair team consisting of 4 GMC CCKW trucks, carrying spare parts, welding gear, and reserve oil. When a tank broke down at the front, the team repaired it on site instead of towing it back to base, saving dozens of hours of transport time. During this campaign, the 761st became a fully self-sustaining machine. Every crew was trained to handle engines, replace tracks, and weld frames. Tankers often told one another, "If it breaks, fix it before dawn." According to the maintenance log, 760, 1st Tank Battalion, March 1945, over 400 man-hours were recorded in a single week. All of it happened amid exploding bombs and falling artillery shells. Harvey wrote in his technical notebook, 3 men, 1 torch, 2 hours, 1 tank back in line. Beneath the cold mud, the flashlight's glare reflected off the steel hulls as they worked like mechanics inside a moving factory. Parallel to maintenance was the supply system. Over 6 months of combat, the unit consumed more than 300 tons of ammunition, 260,000 gallons of gasoline, and thousands of barrels of lubricating oil. According to the Third Army Quartermaster's summary, March 1945, the supply convoys of the 761st had to travel an average of 120 kilometers per day to ensure timely delivery to the front lines. The supply routes across the Rhineland were constantly harassed by German artillery and snipers, forcing many convoys to change routes at night. Yet racial discrimination persisted even in logistics. The U.S. Army Logistics Division Report, 1945, noted that black units were often placed at the bottom of the fuel distribution list. Some days, the 761st received only 70% of its approved gasoline quota, but still maintained its performance. Technical Lieutenant Henry Baker explained in a letter to Bates, "We learned to ration fuel like blood, every drop counts." And, from mid-February, as German forces withdrew deeper into the Saar-Pfalz region, the 761st's mission expanded to include escorting prisoner convoys and protecting Rhine crossings. The temporary bridges built by US engineers could support only 25 tons, while a Sherman tank weighed 30 tons. The solution was to remove ammunition to reduce weight before crossing and reload once across the river. According to the Engineering Division report, March 1945, the 761st conducted 42 bridge crossings without losing a single tank, an unprecedented record. That achievement was made possible by flawless coordination between engineering and armoured logistics teams. By the time they reached the Rhine River, the 761st had become a model mechanised formation. In the Third Army Dispatch, the 23rd of March 1945, Patton acknowledged, "Black Panthers demonstrated continuous mobility and self-sustainment far beyond expectation. Their ability to organise and repair themselves allowed the Third Army to maintain a constant offensive throughout March." According to statistics, from March 1 to the 31st of March 1945, the 761st travelled a total of 1,480 kilometres, destroyed or disabled 92 German vehicles, and captured 1,200 prisoners, without halting operations for more than 48 hours for maintenance. In the rear areas, technical observers from the Ordnance Department began to recognise the 761st's model as the future template. In Post-Combat Evaluation Report No. 7, they wrote, "Sustained success of 760 first indicates that decentralised maintenance and logistics cells increase armoured endurance by 30%. This concept was later integrated into NATO Field Doctrine 1950-2, where the principles of repair forward and mobile supply chain became the foundation of modern mechanised warfare. In March 1945, as Wehrmacht artillery weakened, the convoys of the 761st advanced toward the Moselle River. Along the way, they passed through ruined towns where German civilians watched in silence. Harvey sat in his maintenance truck and wrote the final line in his journal. "We kept them running. That was our war. There was no grand breakthrough, no flag raised over a fortress, but it was their chain of maintenance, supply, and machine-like discipline that kept the Sherman tracks turning until the day of victory." When the first spring sunlight spread over the Rhineland, the tanks of the 761st stood by the Rhine River, their hulls coated with dust from thousands of kilometres of road. Bates walked along the row of tanks, watching the engineers wipe off the last layer of mud, and smiled. "Gentlemen," he said, "you just built the machine that never stopped." In the cold wind and the smell of burnt oil, the soldiers understood that their victory was not in the number of enemy vehicles destroyed, but in the fact that they had created a flawless system where every drop of fuel, every gear, and every man had become part of an unbreakable mechanism, and from that, the doctrine of modern logistics was born. In April 1945, the Central European front fractured like a torn web. The Wehrmacht retreated in all directions, leaving behind scorched towns, collapsed factories, and fields littered with the wrecks of tanks. On the Third Army's operational map, the 761st Tank Battalion advanced through Linz, moving westward into Austria. Their final mission was to clear out remaining pockets of resistance and secure the supply corridor to Steyr. As the Sherman columns rolled through the Gunskirchen region, combat engineers noticed a strange, acrid smell hanging in the morning mist. It was not the scent of gunpowder, it was the smell of death. On the 4th of May 1945, scouts of the 761st discovered a wooden gate bearing the sign Gunskirchen Lager. Behind the barbed wire fence were more than 15,000 Hungarian Jewish prisoners, many naked, skeletal, their eyes sunken. According to the after-action report, 761st Tank Battalion, the camp had been abandoned for 3 days. The SS guards had fled, leaving the prisoners to starve. Sergeant Johnny Stevens wrote in his memoir, "We gave them everything we had, our rations, our chocolate, our blankets. They tried to smile, but their faces cracked." In a 1987 interview at the National Holocaust Museum, he recalled, "When I handed a piece of bread to a man, he cried, not because of hunger, but because someone touched him kindly." That image remained in the memories of the survivors as a symbol. The Jewish poet Sonja Schreiber-Witte, then 17, was liberated from the camp and wrote a poem titled The Black Messiah. Its opening line read, "I never saw a black before. He'll set me free before I die." For those who had been stripped of all dignity, the sight of a black soldier in an American uniform was not only that of a liberator, but proof that humanity still had a conscience. After the liberation, U.S. Army medical officers confirmed that over 3,000 people had died of starvation during the week before the Americans arrived. Ambulances ran day and night, while men of the 761st helped bury the dead in the surrounding forest. According to the Medical Corps report, May 1945, Gunskirchen was the worst scene witnessed by American forces in Austria. In a cable sent to Washington, General Patton wrote, "My tankers found hell, and they behaved like saints." Yet the event revealed another paradox. Nearby German prisoners of war, when marched past the camp, bowed their heads in silence. Many feared execution. During interrogations recorded at the U.S. Army Interrogation Center, Salzburg, dozens of Wehrmacht soldiers expressed shock at how they were treated. One wrote, "We were told the Negroes would kill us. Instead, they gave us water." The report ended with the succinct line, "Fear of Negro soldiers contradicted by humane conduct." The collapse of racial ideology did not come from a battle. It came from a simple act of compassion. On May 6, as the sun rose over the Steyr Mountains, the forward elements of the 761st met the Soviet forces. A photograph taken on the Steyr Bridge captured the moment when two groups of soldiers, one in American uniforms, the other wearing red insignia, shook hands in the middle of the bridge. A female Soviet tank commander ran forward, embraced Sergeant Leonard Smith and shouted, "America, America." Laughter and tears mingled amid the wrecked tanks. According to the Third Army Liaison Report, no mistrust, no hesitation. They saluted each other as survivors of the same storm. That scene marked the end of 180, 3 consecutive days of combat for the 761st, spanning 6 countries and 4 major campaigns. But in the moment of victory, paradox reappeared. Post-war reports from the Office of War Information, 1946, noted that many German POWs in U.S. camps received better food and treatment than the very black soldiers who had captured them. While German prisoners ate in integrated mess halls, veterans of the 761st returned home to buses and restaurants marked white only. Sergeant Floyd Dade Jr., who had driven a tank through the Rhineland, said in a 1985 interview, "We liberated Europe, but America wasn't ready to liberate us." That contradiction led historians to see the 761st as a mirror of the century itself. They had saved thousands from death camps, but returned to live in segregated neighborhoods. They had proven courage on the battlefield, but were denied a seat at the table. During a memorial ceremony in 2005 at Fort Cavazos, a veteran stood before the monument and said, "When we opened the gates of Gunskirchen, we thought humanity had won. Then we came home and found out the war wasn't over." By mid-May 1945, as the guns fell silent, the 761st was ordered to halt in the Steyr area, awaiting redeployment. The tanks stood in line along the road, their hulls pitted with bullet marks, their Black Panther emblems faded after thousands of kilometers. In that moment, no one spoke of victory. Harvey sat on the engine deck, watching the river flow, and wrote in his diary, "We fought for a world that was watching us." Across the bridge, Soviet troops raised the red flag. On the near side, the American flag rippled in the wind. 2 opposing symbols reflected on the water, blending like colors that could not be separated. The numbers in the final Third Army report, May 1945, closed the story in deafening silence. 4,000 German troops neutralized, 71 tanks lost, 50% casualties, and 183 days without rest. But numbers could not capture the moment when a black soldier bent down to offer a starving prisoner a piece of bread, or when former enemies shook hands on the Steyr Bridge. Those were moments of humanity that transcended victory. From the fearful eyes of German prisoners to the grateful smiles of survivors at Gunskirchen, the 761st shattered an entire racial ideology through the simplest act, treating people as people. Yet upon returning home, they faced a nation that had not yet learned that lesson. The question still echoed at veteran reunions. If they saw us at Gunskirchen, would they call us Negroes or Americans? It was a question with no answer, but it opened the door to the next chapter of history, where victory became the beginning of another battle, the struggle to be recognized as equals in the very country they had saved. After May 1945, when the last shots faded along the banks of the Steyr River, the 761st Tank Battalion was not immediately sent home. They remained in Austria for 3 months to clear battlefields, guard prisoners, and supervise repatriation convoys. In Lieutenant Colonel Paul L. Bates's diary entry dated June 12, he wrote a short line, "The war ended, but the work continued." That sentence described not only post-war duties but also a longer legacy, the struggle to change the mindset of an entire army. Soon after the war, the U.S. War Department began assessing the performance of armored units in a series of reports titled Armored Forces Evaluation Series 1946, 1947. In Volume No. Sirrah, the section on the 761st Tank Battalion carried the annotation Model Unit for Post-War Training. The compilers emphasized that the coordination between infantry and armor within the 761st was 20% more effective than the average of comparable units. The report recommended preserving the SCR 508 radio coordination system and the 3-tank formation structure, lead, support, recovery. These findings became the foundation of the Combined Arms Doctrine, 1948, the first U.S. Combined Arms Combat Doctrine, where principles of warfare were built upon inter-branch coordination rather than skin color. That same year, 1948, another event marked a political turning point. President Harry S. Truman signed Executive Order 9981, ending racial segregation in the U.S. military. In his preparatory notes for the signing, his military advisor cited the case of the 761st as empirical evidence. The performance of Negro armored units in Europe proves integration enhances efficiency. According to National Archives Record Group 220, this was the first time the name of the 761st appeared officially in a national policy planning document. From a wartime political experiment, they became a doctrinal foundation for a unified army. Their influence extended beyond U.S. borders. When NATO was founded in 1949, several former German officers were invited to advise on developing the armored doctrine of the Bundeswehr. During technical conferences in Bonn between 1955 and 1957, portions of the Third Army's training manuals were translated into German, including descriptions of the cat hunting tactics and the principle of mobility over armor. This philosophy later became the conceptual basis for the Leopard 11965, a tank designed to prioritize speed and maneuverability over heavy armor. In the Bundeswehr Armored Doctrine Report 1964, it stated, "The American concept, derived from field experience in 1944-45, emphasizes mobility as the decisive factor." The origin of that idea lay in the cold, muddy nights of Lorraine, where the black soldiers of the 761st had fought through artillery fire to keep their tracks moving. It took more than 3 decades after the war for their achievements to be formally recognized. On the 24th of January 1978, President Jimmy Carter signed the order awarding the Presidential Unit Citation to the 761st Tank Battalion. At the White House ceremony, Carter said, "They fought for a country that did not yet recognize them. Today we recognize both their valor and our debt." In the audience, elderly veterans rose silently. Among them were Leonard Smith, who had once shaken hands with a Russian tank woman at Steyr, and William Harvey, the mechanic who had stayed awake 3 nights straight in the Rhineland. For them, It was not just a medal, but the long-delayed confirmation that history had finally placed their names where they belonged. 20 years later, on the 12th of January 1997, the Medal of Honor ceremony was held in Washington for 7 members of the battalion, including Staff Sergeant Ruben Rivers. President Bill Clinton declared, "No African American who deserved the Medal of Honor for World War II received it during that war. Today we fill that gap." When the medal was placed in the hands of Rivers' family, the entire hall rose in applause. The spotlight reflected off the golden metal, casting a glow on the walls like a flame. A veteran of the 761st whispered, "He kept us moving, even now." After those pages of recognition, the legacy of the 761st continued to expand. In 2005, the Department of Defense dedicated the 761st Tank Battalion Memorial at Fort Hood, now Fort Cavazos, Texas. The monument, made of black granite, bears the image of a Black Panther and a Sherman tank beneath the inscription, "Come out fighting." At the ceremony, the keynote speaker, Major General William B. Caldwell, said, "They didn't just change the army, they changed America's idea of itself." That same year, in Austria, local authorities held the 60th anniversary of the liberation of the Gunskirchen concentration camp, inviting representatives of the 761st veterans and surviving Jewish families. During the ceremony, an elderly woman held up an old photograph and told the interpreter, "He gave me bread. Tell him I still remember." 10 years later, in 2015, Israel held a memorial event at Yad Vashem, adding the 761st to the list of Allied units recognized for liberating concentration camps. A letter of gratitude from the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated, "Their color did not matter, their humanity did." From a unit once regarded as a political experiment, they had become a universal symbol of humanity. Today, scholarly writings view the 761st as the link between military victory and the evolution of civil rights thought. According to the U.S. Military History Review, Volume Satings Voting 432004, the legacy of the 761st lies not only in their combat record, but in proving that democracy's strength is its inclusiveness. That is the conclusion of 60 years of history, where Sherman's treads not only crushed German tanks, but also ground down the prejudice rooted within America itself. As the sunset fell over Fort Cavazos during a memorial service, the American flag drifted slowly against a golden sky. A veteran looked up and said softly, "We were soldiers once, and we became a lesson." Their legacy transcended race and time. The 761st Tank Battalion had taught the world that the strength of a democratic army does not lie in color, but in the ability to unite people toward a common goal. They did not just change how America saw its black soldiers, they changed how the world understood courage and human dignity.